Ralph and I grew up together on the same street on Davis Islands on Lucerne many years ago, and Ralph was not too much older than me. We chatted for a little while, and he says, "You know, John, we can always disagree on issues, but we can always go have a beer afterwards." And that's my friendship with Ralph Fernandez. And I'd like to speak to you all a little bit about state-sponsored terrorism and kind of explain what goes into that term. It's defined under the United States Federal Code, where it's empowering the Secretary of State. And a state-sponsored terrorist organization is a country, and listen to these words, which has repeatedly provided support for acts of international terrorism. That's the federal law. And the State Department, at the direction of the Secretary of State, keeps a list. And I'm a list guy. They keep a list also. So I'm going to talk about the list, how you get on the list, how you get off the list, and what does the list mean today. If you're on the list, you are sanctioned. And let's talk about the sanctions first. The sanctions, according to the code, are you're banned from arms-related exports and sales. You have control over exports of dual-use items requiring 30-day congressional notification for goods or services that could significantly enhance the terrorist list country's military capability or ability to support terrorism. You prohibit economic assistance, and you impose miscellaneous financial and other restrictions, including but not limited to oppose loans by the World Bank and other financial institutions, lifting diplomatic immunity, denying companies and individuals tax credit or income earned in terrorist-listed nations, denial of duty-free treatment of goods, prohibit any citizen, U.S. citizen, from engaging in financial transactions with terrorist-listed governments, and prohibit Defense Department contracts above $100,000, plus, for Cuba only, an embargo since 1960. Now, let's talk about the list. The first list was done in December of 1979, and the list included Libya, Iraq, South Yemen, and Syria. Since then, Libya, Iraq, and South Yemen have been removed from the list. From the original list, only Syria remains. And think about Syria's position in the world today. Added to the list in 1982 was Cuba. In 1984, Iran. Remember the Iran hostage crisis. North Korea was added in 1988, removed in 2008 by George Bush. The Sudan was added in 1993. So that's the list and the movement of the list. To recap the list, today the list includes Syria, Iran, Sudan, and Cuba, plus the embargo upon Cuba since 1960. I ask you, where's North Vietnam? They were never on the list. Where's Afghanistan? Where's Pakistan? Where are other countries that could be deserving? Are major trade and tourism partners endorsing this? Some of the major trade and tourism partners of Cuba to this day include Great Britain, Canada, Mexico, Spain, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Brazil, and numerous others. That are also loyal partners and allies of our country. The dilemma that's posed by the list, those that are on the list, and the trading partner dilemma. Does Cuba have a totalitarian repressive regime? Yes, it does. I have a list here, executive summary, human rights report that has numerous instances of issues of human rights violations, published by the State Department at the fingertips of Senator Kerry, now Secretary Kerry. I'm not taking issue with that. Are there human rights violations in Cuba? Yes, there are. However, is Cuba a hotbed of terrorism as defined and as compared with others and considering our trading partners, on par with Syria, Iran, and the Sudan. No, it is not when it is objectively compared with others who have been removed, namely North Korea recently. After you consider the list and the solution has to be considered. And I propose that the solution, which is, I think, rapidly developing, is to remove Cuba from the list, normalize relations and trade, acquire and promote trade through change and change through trade. Because I believe free markets will free people. And those are my comments for this afternoon.
John, thank you. Next up is Annie Betancourt. Annie is a former state representative and also the League of Women Voters of Florida director. So Annie Betancourt.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to take a minute to thank the World Trade Center and the people from Tampa for allowing this important dialogue to take place. Tampa is way ahead from Miami when it comes to addressing these thorny issues, and I believe this is still a thorny one. It would have been very difficult, if not impossible, to hold this conversation in Miami without having a group of people protesting outside. But today I simply want to touch on two specific points: the unintended consequences of the outdated U.S. embargo, and how having Cuba on the U.S. Department of State list of terrorist states has shut the door on educational exchanges. The first point is that the full economic embargo imposed in 1962 by the Kennedy administration and codified into law in 1996 during the Clinton administration is an aberration, a total deviation from its original intent. The original intent was to bring economic embargo, to bring about democratic changes in Cuba, in other words, to punish the people. Eventually, the thinking and the rationale back then, the idea was so that Cubans would revolt and take to the streets and protest and eventually overthrow the Castro regime. In my opinion, as I think about that, pretty cynical reasoning to use food as a weapon. Well, it has not happened. Instead, the Cubans have figured out a way of getting out of the country, either by boat or by crossing the border through Canada or Mexico, and evoke the Cuban Adjustment Act, signed by then Lyndon Johnson as president in 1966, where Cubans receive preferential treatment and are protected, becoming eligible for U.S. residency a year and a day after they touch U.S. territory. Practically no questions asked, and absolutely bizarre reasoning. Since the U.S. embargo is now codified into law, it takes an act of Congress to undo the legislation. And I don't see that happening until certain members of Florida congressional delegation are repositioned. Congresswoman Kathy Castor has been the lone voice in Florida to break away from the pack and speak her mind, articulating the wishes of a greater number of constituents. In my opinion, and I have said it before, she has shown true leadership and courage in her position. The second point I want to make today is that strange things have happened in Tallahassee in the Florida legislature since I left in 2002. Florida's education code, planning and budgeting for state universities have been amended 4 times, in 2002, 2006, 2007, and again in 2010, to make sure no state funds are made available to state universities. to implement, organize, direct, coordinate, or administer, support the implementation, organization, direction, coordination, or administration of activities related to involving travel to a terrorist state. There we go. A terrorist state is defined, as the attorney described, as any state, country, or nation designated by the U.S. Department of State as a state sponsor of terrorism. As it turned out, Cuba was placed on that list back in 1982 when the administration apparently decided that Cuba harbored members of the Basque Left, the ETA, and members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, which are now undergoing peace talks negotiation to end the bloody civil war. The Spanish government has also expressed appreciation for Cuba for taking the Basque revolutionaries during the height of the conflict. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell has repeatedly stated that Cuba does not present a military threat to the United States. So why it's not removed? Well, in my opinion, here we have collateral damage that by keeping Cuba on the list, strange things continue to happen. Like in the case here in Florida, where our state universities are prohibited from engaging on educational exchanges. Want to promote democracy? Open the door. Allow educational exchanges to take place. Florida is the only state that has such laws. Other universities, Texas, Alabama, California, Massachusetts, all have academic programs where students and faculty benefit from these experiences. Well, where do we go from here? There are a number of steps that can be taken. The chief executive officer and chief president can move forward by reducing trade restrictions, ending the travel ban, and promoting cultural exchanges. A year ago, I attended here in Tampa a concert where Maestro Perez Mesa conducted the Florida Orchestra, and it was part of a cultural exchange between the National Symphony Orchestra of Cuba and the Florida Orchestra. In my opinion, that is a step in the right direction, a way to learn about music and share with each other, or even athletic competitions. There are many ways of thawing a frozen relationship, a relic of the Cold War. Thank you.